What's up, Rangers fans? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you all are having a great start to your day. I know I am, because we're in for another action-packed episode here of Rangers Review, myself alongside Statboy Steven, as we break down the past week or so of everything New York Rangers, between not just their games, now they performed our initial stances on them, but all the type of moves that have happened during the process of not just certain players excelling individual performances, but also a trade regarding Brendan Lemieux, what that means for the Rangers, what that also means for a guy, Vitaly Kravtsov, the Rangers' coveted prospect, who looks to make his debut this week at the time of recording this, and what David Quinn brings to the New York Rangers now that he is back off the COVID protocol list, now that Knoblauch is no longer the interim head coach for the Rangers going forward. So as always, make sure you stay all the way until the end of the video for all the deets and all of our thoughts on the Rangers, how they fared this past week and what's ahead for them in this upcoming week and beyond. And if you guys end up enjoying this kind of Ranger content and want to see more great Ranger content like this, make sure to smash that like and subscribe on, share this video with your friends, put on the notification bell, all those great things. Thank you all so much for the countless support, guys. Now let's get right into today's episode. All right, guys, welcome back for another episode here at Rangers Review. Big week for the Rangers, going without David Quinn, and then with David Quinn getting a couple more games, so Knoblauch beyond the bench, at least as the actual head coach. Then when Quinn came back for the last game, he was still there as an assistant. But an eventful week for the Rangers. We have plenty to talk about, a lot more than I initially anticipated, regarding a trade that we all know by now in particular. But before we get into any of that, Steven, how are you doing today?
Doing okay. I watched Niels Lundkvist's last regular season game a few hours ago.
How do you do?
Interesting. He was in the penalty box for 12 minutes, hit from behind. So he got 2 minutes and 10 minutes game misconduct. But I think Lulia scored 4 goals while I was in the penalty box.
Okay.
So he came out of the penalty box smiling. But, you know, just to start off before we get into the Ranger stuff, his regular season's over now, and his numbers, his career numbers, are amazing. I mean,
in comparison with other Swedish defensemen that we know
in history, in SHL history, but also this season, like career all time among defensemen age 20 and younger, he ranks first in points all time with 78, second in goals with 30.
Wow.
Career single season, first in goals with 14, second in points with 32. This season on his own team, it ranks first in goals, second in points as a defenseman, as a 20-year-old defenseman. And in the SHL, amongst all defensemen, first in goals and sixth in points. Again, at age 20, that's pretty good.
That's awfully impressive.
Yeah, playoffs start now, and people are probably going to ask, and I've had some questions about it today already, so I'll bring it up here as well. Niels Lundkvist is contracted to both Luleå and the Swedish Federation as a national team player.
Correct.
So once his team is eliminated from the SHL playoffs, the Swedish Federation has the choice to keep him under contract until the World Championships or release him so he can sign his entry-level contract. It depends on what Niels Lundkvist wants to do. In the past, players have requested a release from the national team to sign their entry-level contract in the NHL. So I don't foresee an issue if he requests that. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he wants to play in the World Championships. You know, he's played in the World Juniors a couple of times. The World Championships is the highest level you can play with your national team aside from the Olympics. So it would be pretty cool for him at age 20 to play in that tournament. If that's the case, he would be released after the tournament, which is mid-June. So that's probably the timetable we're looking at. In that situation, the entry-level contract will only kick in for next season, which means he will be a restricted free agent in 2024.
Yeah, my assumption is that he will go to the tournament and the Rangers will sign him midsummer. I think makes most sense for him. And then
there's no rush. There's no rush. His rights only expire in 2022, so there's no pressure on the Rangers to get it done before a specific date this summer.
Yeah. I never really expected Niels to even be considered for this season. Should it be a short playoff stint or anything along those lines. So yeah, I think next season is when we're hoping to see Niels actually on Broadway, because I do not foresee him having much playing time in the AHL, and you can probably attest to that big time.
The spot that was vacated by D'Angelo has been filled by some random guys that won't be there again next season, like Brandon Smith, Anthony Bitetto, Jack Johnson.
And yeah, exactly. And they're all going to be gone. So
yeah, well, Bitetto they might still have if Seattle doesn't claim him in the expansion draft.
True.
But Niels Lundkvist, it's his spot to lose. So in for next season. On the right side, you have Fox Truba, and that third spot will be Niels Lundkvist, unless something really crazy happens. I don't foresee that. I don't foresee any scenario where Niels Lundkvist is not on the starting roster on opening night.
And how does that make you feel? How does that make us, I should say? I'll even ask myself the same question for the upcoming season. As entertained as this year has been at times, especially over the past couple of weeks with some resurgence from this Rangers club, having Kravtsov, Miller, and Lundkvist all potentially being in the lineup every single day starting next season. How does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel happy and sad at the same time, I guess.
It's bittersweet for you.
It's bittersweet seeing them leave Europe, but at the same time, I'm happy that they go. I mean, it almost feels like my kids are going off to college. You know, I've been traveling around, especially with Lundkvist. I've traveled all over the world to watch him play. I've interacted with his family countless times. I've spoken to his teammates. I've spoken to his sister, his grandpa, his father. I've spoken to Luleå team management several times about him. You know,
his uncle.
Sorry,
I said you're practically his uncle.
Yeah. Well, Well,
a distant uncle.
I am 16 years older, so technically it wouldn't even be possible. But I've interacted with him several times. I've done some interviews with him that people have probably seen when I share those on Twitter. It's been fun to watch his progress, but that 2018 draft is looking like a pretty good draft for the Rangers moving forward. You know, you have Kravtsov, Lundkvist, and Miller in the first round. You have Pajuniemi in the fifth round. Then you have Simon Kjellberg and Riley Hughes still in college in the sixth and the seventh round. Joey Keane, who they traded for Julien Gauthier, who's now in the lineup. That's a pretty solid piece to have. The only two picks that you could argue are a bit of a dud are Jakob Ragnarsson, who plays in the Swedish second tier of hockey and isn't really doing much, and Olof Lindbom, but he's a goalie. He's only 20 years old. So there's still room to improve. They still have 2 years to make up their minds if they want to sign him or not. But that 2018 draft could go down in history as one of the best for the Rangers.
Yeah, and that's fantastic when you look back, because there were plenty of controversies after that draft. For me personally, I felt pretty good. Niels, obviously, there was a little bit more of a risk just because he was just getting started in his SHL career. We didn't necessarily know what to expect. We see an undersized defenseman that has a lot of possible upside when it comes to his offense and his hockey IQ, but still had a lot of proving to do. But to see how everything shaped up, and really that was the start of the rebuild outside of 2017 between Hedel and Elias. This was like, okay, now we're really getting indulged with it. Not like we're just trading to get these draft picks like with Arizona to get Elias eventually. So it's crazy looking back. I feel like that was just yesterday already. And now we're going to have all these guys in the lineup sooner than later. So that makes me really excited.
It was the first draft after the letter was sent out to fans.
Yep.
And it was a draft where we ended up with some additional picks in the Ryan McDonough and Rick Nash trade. And, you know, I keep going back and forth on which trade I like the most for the Rangers, the Zibanejad trade or the Rick Nash trade. But,
yeah,
you know, the Zibanejad trade gave us a legitimate first-line center. But if you look at the Rick Nash trade and what that turned into, you know, you use the first-round pick and a second-rounder to trade up, and you get K'Andre Miller, you get Ryan Spooner, who you then
becomes Ryan Strome.
Flip for Ryan Strome, and all of a sudden you have a top pair defenseman in Ryan Lindgren, a second-line center in Ryan Strome, and a second pair defenseman in K'Andre Miller coming out of a trade for a guy who retired 6 weeks later.
I know, yeah.
That's a pretty good deal. You know, they also got Matt Bolesky, of course, and a seventh-round pick.
That was just a salary jump, though.
The seventh-round pick they ended up trading to the Carolina Hurricanes, I think, or they traded elsewhere. Anyway, I think they traded the seventh-round pick to Carolina, and they got an earlier pick, the one in 2018, that they used for Riley Hughes, who's still in college. He's just finished his sophomore season. So yeah, that trade just was one of the trades that set up this rebuild. And then a year later, you trade Matt Zuccarello and Kevin Hayes at the deadline. And now you see these pieces come into play. You have Keandre Miller in the lineup. Vitaly Kravtsov is going to make his NHL debut soon. Nils Lundkvist is coming over this summer. You have Matthew Robertson, who's already on the contract. You have who was the guy this year that they drafted?
This year?
Yes.
Oh, Schneider?
They're in the third round.
Berard? No.
Oliver Tarnstrom. Oliver Tarnstrom.
Okay.
Yeah. The third round pick from the Zuccarello trade. They just keep adding these pieces to the rebuild, and we're slowly seeing what this team is becoming. But in the meantime, they're playing attractive hockey. The last week with Knobloch behind the bench has been fascinating, has been interesting. And yeah, I never in my life expected to send out a tweet with the words "since Wayne Gretzky" involving a New York Ranger, but that's what happened last week.
And I think that's a great way to really settle in. What is the recap for the past week of the Rangers? Well, let's dive right into it, shall we? Basically, in a nutshell, Philadelphia Flyers, not the greatest matchup for them once again on their side of things, because it seemed like it was just more and more of the past week and a half or so when the Rangers blew them out 9-0. This time it ends up being 8-3, but it was definitely led by now the Flyers' daddy, and yes, Mika Zibanejad. 6 more points, another hat trick, and the first, and you can lay out the stat regarding Wayne Gretzky here in a second, but just another phenomenal performance. And a week where, as I summarize with the other games here shortly, Artemi Panarin was basically non-existent on the score sheet. You have Mika Zibanejad at least stepping up. Well, it'll be nice to have them both kind of clicking at the same time here. But Zibanejad, he's back. It's evident when you get 2 games in a span of 8 days where you get at least 6 points against the same team, going a natural hat trick. By all means, I don't know how you can even fathom the thought of that happening for Zibanejad, who looked like he was having by far the worst season of his career since becoming a New York Ranger.
Yeah, he had a really slow start to the season, and everything has been said about that already. But the last 2 weeks have seen the resurgence of Mika Zibanejad. Unfortunately, in fantasy hockey, I was playing against my girlfriend last week, and she had Mika Zibanejad on her team. So I was royally screwed. But
that's the way you get screwed over, I guess, right?
Yeah, if I have to lose, I'd rather lose to her, I guess. No, but that game, a natural hat trick again, 3 assists again. And I looked it up. 6-point games are not as uncommon as I thought before I started researching. But since 1979, there have been 202 NHL games with a 6-point performance. Zibanejad did it twice in 8 days, which is impressive. And then I was just curious, when was the last time a player did it twice in 8 days, a 6-point game? And I had to go back all the way to December 1984. Wayne Gretzky did it twice in 5 days. He had 2 6-point games 5 days apart.
And that's like, obviously it's prime Wayne Gretzky, but that's like right really as just, he wasn't even in the league that long at that point. Like that's perfect. That's like
that was like 4 years into the league. But
exactly.
What astonished me even more about that is that 7 days later he had another 6-point game. He had 3 6-point games in the span of 12 days.
Wow. Not all that surprising though. Like when you think about who the man is exactly.
There are hockey stats and then there are Wayne Gretzky stats.
Yeah,
and,
you have to keep them separate because our analytic self are just we're not going to even try to comprehend.
I was researching this, and I always try to find something that you don't really see on the broadcast or a stat that you don't really see the Rangers tweet out. The easy one is, let's see if someone has scored 6 points twice against the same team in one season.
Right.
But I was just curious about the time span. So I looked into that one, and I was quite excited when I saw, okay, first since Wayne Gretzky in 1984. I was born in 1984. So that stat was was special. But 8-3 after a 9-0 win over them the week before. It's amazing. And I keep coming back to what we discussed last week. This team looks different with Chris Knobloch behind the bench. There's something different about them. There's something about them skating around, not being afraid to make mistakes. They don't look stressed out. They don't look nervous out on the ice. And they were ready from the first minute until the last. They were ready.
Well, I think I'll go ahead.
Yeah, they beat the Sabres on, was it Monday?
Yeah, because our recap is following that Sabres game.
Yeah. So they beat the Sabres, and then the Flyers, the 8-3 game. On Saturday, the Flyers actually came out, the way I expected them to.
Actually, had structure.
They had some structure. They had some decent defense, and their score sheet didn't look like a scoring card from the golf course for once. With all their defensemen being -6 and -5 and -4. Tiger Woods would be proud. But the Flyers were actually keeping up with us on Saturday, and they ended up winning that game 2-1. A fluke goal by Morin, who was referred to as moron by Steve Veliquette during intermission, which was pretty funny. You cannot win them all, but the structure that the team showed with Chris Knobloch behind the bench was refreshing. And then yesterday, we played the second of a back-to-back against the Washington Capitals, and David Quinn's behind the bench. He's back, and I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. I post a joke here or there on Twitter about guess who's back. And I'll be honest with you, after the first two periods, I switched off my TV. I didn't even watch the third period. When I heard that Lafreniere played 4 minutes through the first two periods, I was like, oh my God, we had 2 weeks under Knobloch where, the lines were the same. Yeah, the ice time wasn't really distributed evenly, but at least the line combinations were the same. The line combinations you saw in the third period were the same that you saw in the first period.
Correct.
There was structure to the team. And then yesterday, Quinn's behind the bench, and all of a sudden I see Brendan Lemieux with Kevin Rooney, and I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. It's the same stuff. And I decided to watch a documentary on an Australian serial killer. It was less stressful than watching.
Wait. I understood you were a little frustrated with the Lafreniere ice time. I didn't think you were that frustrated. Come on.
I watch documentaries when I want to relax, and I watch documentaries on everything. But in this case,
nothing relaxing like the Australian slasher. Oh, that's
Ivan Milat, in case anyone's interested. He murdered some backpackers in the 80s. Anyway, I rewatched the third period this morning, just to see the goals, and it was nice that they had a strong comeback. I wish they just didn't have to. They were so flat the first 40 minutes. The first and second period they came out, they looked nothing like the team I'd watched the 2 weeks prior.
And let me hold you there, because that's a great question. Did we see the Rangers have two flat periods to that same extent during the entire time Knobloch was as coach? I don't really think so. No. Even when they had the lack of scoring in the third game against the Flyers, where they lost the night before, it wasn't to the same level. And I get it. Look, they're playing a back-to-back, right? You're not going to be stellar each night. That's perfectly fine. I'm sure that was all a factor into it. But yeah, you're right. They were dead. It seemed like the soul was sucked out of them a little bit. They were only having 7 shots as they were. I think there was 6 minutes left in the second. It was atrocious what they were doing. Like, offense non-existent. The goaltending definitely wasn't terrible at times. But if you go back here to the first game of this past week, since recapping, going back to the 8-3 game, like, between taking advantage of the opportunities given you because of just how poor defensively the structure was for the Flyers, Rangers just did not skip a beat. They looked like a team that had the confidence where it's like, yeah, we know we're better than you. We're going to continue to beat you down. We're not even going to give you the light of day to try to come back in this thing. Don't get me wrong. Igor was stellar. He gave up 3 goals in his first appearance back, but he also had over 40 saves. He was strong. Adam Fox, who is the star of the week in the AHL right now, first star of the week, had 5 assists in that game. Phenomenal. Ryan Strome, 4 points. He continues to produce.
He leads the team in points, Ryan Strome, by the way.
And yeah, we can expand on him a little bit because that's huge. All right. Don't get me wrong, I critiqued Ryan Strome just as much as anyone else at times this past year. But I'm so happy to be swallowing my own words at the end of the day, because all we want as Ranger fans is to see the Rangers that are currently in the lineup succeed. Okay, if you're not going to succeed and you're getting more credit than you're deserving, we're going to call you out for it. But Ryan Strome has kind of been polar opposite. And when only half of his points, not even, are contributed from Artemi Panarin. So it's not like you can make that argument that, oh, this is all Breadman. It's not. It actually isn't this year. And that's something that's really standing out to me with the increased role he's getting and actually solidifying himself as a number 2. So that was great. But then when you get on to the second game, yes, there really wasn't much offense there. It is what it is. I didn't expect the Rangers to completely sweep the Flyers all season or anything like that. But
it's also really, really difficult to follow up a game where you score 8 goals.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, if you can score at least half that, that's beyond expected.
No.
No one expected the Rangers to go from 9 to then 8. Like, let's be real. That was just one of those things where it's like, we're going to just keep pushing. Flyers simply couldn't get over the last game against them, it seemed. But then they regrouped. And then in this past game against the Capitals, you're right. They looked dead. David Quinn behind the bench again. And it leaves you wondering, okay, how much of a factor was that? Well, Alexis Lafreniere, if you take a look at his ice time, he had a total of just around 8 minutes in the Sunday game against the Capitals. The game before that, with Knobloch still as the actual, interim head coach, had 11. He's been fluctuating with his ice time all season. We know this. And you're right. During Knobloch's stint, he really relied more on the veterans. The third line got playing time, but it really wasn't all that existent other than gain some more increased time between one of the 2 Ranger blowout wins against the Flyers. But it was nice to see at least that in the third, in that game, they lost 5-4, but they were losing 4-0 the Rangers, and they came all the way back. Colin Blackwell on his birthday on Sunday, happy belated birthday to Blackwell. He scores 2 goals on his birthday, 7th and 8th of the season. And then you get other guys contributing, including Alexis Lafreniere, who had a nice goal. I believe, if my memory's not mistaken, it was either on a pass or a rebound. Beautiful shot, and that was in. And it was nice to see him contribute. Gauthier is continuing to produce. He had an assist, but he's another one. 7 minutes the other night when everything was going wrong for the Rangers. So you think, okay, maybe it makes sense to Quinn give more ice time to the youngsters because the vets aren't producing. But then you look at the game before that, 9 minutes. The game before that, even farther, was around 13, but that was because of the blowout. Because then before that, again, it was just low minutes. Gauthier has been a guy that has not been given nearly enough playing time, in my opinion, all season long. We've talked about this plenty with Kravtsov now in the mix that we'll be talking about shortly, and all these other wingers. It's like, why are you not giving him enough opportunities? In my opinion, this is a make or break year for him. What are you going to do with him going into now the expansion? What are you going to do with that? If you're going to keep him great, then how do you go about next season with him? Because when you look at the depth and the wings, there's virtually no room for him unless you give him enough opportunities to prove himself. And yes, I know he hasn't been stellar every game. He's gotten some stupid penalties, but we've seen all those flashes of him, which are very Kreider-esque in a lot of ways as a righty. I just think he deserves more of a leash that he's been given, and that's probably frustrating me quite a bit. Along with Alexis Lafreniere, your first overall pick. You only give him 4 minutes through the first 40, and then you give him total 8 in a game where you literally did not do anything until the third period. And when you did, one of those goal scorers was Alexis Lafreniere to keep it close. So what is your initial stance, just in a nutshell again, on that final game this past week? And then we'll expand from there.
Look, I have been one of Quinn's biggest critics the last couple of weeks.
I think we all have to an extent. It's not like we want to be.
I was critical of him like at the start of the season. I didn't like the way and I've brought this up several times, the line juggling, the moving players up and down the lineup. It annoys me so much because when I look at players like Tim Stützle and Nils Höglander in Vancouver, they are paired with 2 line mates and they stick with it. Win or lose, they stick with the lines. And every time this team concedes a goal, it's like he's itching to press a button and change something. And it reminds me of someone at the casino, at the roulette table,
Yeah, we said this last time.
who changes his bet every time he loses. There's just no structure, and that's my biggest concern. Yes, the ice time is bothering me a little bit. Well, what bothers me more is the lack of structure on this team. I've seen Karko play with almost anyone on the team this season. Same with Lafreniere. He's been up and down the lineup, left wing, right wing, first line, second line, third line, fourth line. Julien Gauthier goes from scoring a goal to being a healthy scratch, being back in the lineup, to getting an assist, being a healthy scratch again. There's just the decision making. It's baffling at times, but I would never be one of those people who says fire Quinn. I don't think you should fire Quinn. I think what Quinn and the Rangers management should do here is sit down with Chris Drury and Chris Knobloch and your assistant captains, Jacob Trouba, Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, or Temi Panarin, with your leadership group, sit down at a table and talk about, hey guys, I was gone for 10 days or 2 weeks. I was gone for 2 weeks. Tell me, what was different? And what changes or what things that were different did you experience as a positive change? Try to learn something from it, because I keep hearing, Quinn was still in control. Quinn was still, Quinn was still making all the lineup decisions, this and that. Yes, that's true. But comparing it to my own life, when I'm on vacation, someone takes over from me at work, and my team that report to me then have to report to someone else. Even though I am still in charge, technically, I'm half a world away in New York for 2 weeks. It's still different because I'm not there in the building telling them what to do. No, it's my replacement, temporary replacement during my absence, who's telling them those things, and that's different. There's no other way to look at it. I don't believe the whole story like, oh no, it's all the same. It's not the same, because there's a different guy behind the bench. There's a different guy in the locker room as they walk in. There's a different guy who talks to them during a timeout. It's different. And what the Rangers need to do here is they need to have a long, hard look at what was different the last 2 weeks and what they can change to implement that and learn from it. It doesn't matter what job you do. It doesn't matter in what field you work. It doesn't matter how high your salary is, what level you are, what responsibilities you have. Everybody in any job can learn from past experiences. Everybody can learn from others. What the Rangers need to do here, they need to sit down and talk about the last 2 weeks and just talk about, how did this happen? How do you win 9-0 against the Flyers? Yes, the Flyers defense was bad, but you win 8-3 against them the following week, and you beat the Sabres 5-3, and you beat the Capitals 3-1. Something was different about this team. Not even looking at the wins, something was different about this team.
Even in their losses, until Quinn came back, they were not losses where I felt, oh, this team was absolutely defeated. And that was the big takeaway.
Yesterday's game was the first game since Quinn's last game where we gave up 5 goals.
And that should be telling. And I get it that you have Kincaid in that. He's not the most stellar guy, but when you have a Georgiev that's been struggling, and an Igor that you're obviously not going to have doing a back-to-back or anything like that, I just don't understand how much coincidences we need to have until you get a real reality check. Luckily, this is the first of a coincidence. Hopefully this isn't a trend, where we see everything kind of going back to what it was prior to Quinn being on the COVID protocol. Because if it is, then hello, Jeff Gordon, John Davidson, I'm sure they've already had discussions, but it would be a further discussion to have. While this is Jeff's pick, might I add, who brought in David Quinn, it's like, okay, wow, we are really back to our old ways, kind of like our main issues that we had earlier in the season. A team that isn't a rebuild, but lacks the idea of being in a rebuild, lacking the structure that you're going to have on every given night. And I also want to throw out here this quote. getting into Kravtsov, because we'll be talking about him shortly after the Lemieux news. But I just want to say how Quinn was quoted recently regarding Kravtsov and how he just said hello to him for the first time in practice, arriving with them and saying how, we'll see what happens when he's in the lineup. He's like, he said something along the lines of, yes, we'll have him in when we think he is able to contribute. And when we do, we'll have him in at some point, like to help this team when we feel the time's right. But my initial stance just of what he said there, and again, that wasn't word for word, so don't quote me on this exactly, but my point is if this is a team in a full rebuild, why would that even be the approach? I get it. You're trying to have a winning mentality, a winning structure. You're pushing for playoffs, which definitely helps the development of younger players. But the mentality that a coach that was brought in for a full rebuild is having this year does not coincide with the belief of a rebuild, in the sense of having Lafreniere, having Gauthier, and even Kakko being poorly used in more ways than one. And again, you're not blaming everything on the coach. I'm fully aware of that. These players have to produce. They have to do their own thing at the end of the day. But there's a confidence issue that is obviously aligned with David Quinn to an extent, not just with his own coaching, but with how the players react to him. If you're not getting a good dialogue, for all we know, between Lafreniere or Kakko or whoever it's going to be with the head coach that's trying to help this rebuild, you're only going to get so far. So to see Knoblauch come in, and as you point out too, where you have a team that, yes, they're being structured the same way. David Quinn isn't there, but yes, he gave all the game notes, all that. But as we were talking before us recording this, for people that didn't see it, my stance was, yes, if I'm a worker and say you're gone, even though you're the boss, and someone comes in interim, I'm not going to have the same mentality. I can tell you that personally from every time that I've worked somewhere. It's a different look, especially if you have a boss that maybe you're not on the best side with. Maybe you're just always tense around them because you're worried if you slip up the slightest thing, that's going to be a detriment to you failing your job, being fired, or in case of a firing, this will be a healthy scratch. Take Julien Gauthier, that he knows he's been on the really tense about all season long, how it's definitely in the back of his head constantly. If you have that taken away, odds are you're going to feel a little bit more relaxed. You're going to feel comfortable and try to just be your best you. I feel like we saw more of the best individual performances from a player standpoint and from a confidence standpoint during Knoblauch's reign than we ever did with Quinn this season, which is awfully concerning in my opinion. And I'm not trying to jump the gun. I'm not trying to get too far ahead. But those were really evident to me, even in their losses, versus the losses that they've had with Quinn all season long.
Yeah, and I think the contrast of going from what we've seen now to the game yesterday, and I know it was a back-to-back, and I know that teams on the second game of a back-to-back usually don't perform as well as they can. Yes, I get that. But it's not that we were outplayed. It's like the team didn't show up. And I've brought this up in the past. First game of the season, first game after the bye week, first game after the All-Star break, first game of the qualifying round. Every time the first game, this team looks flat. Every time Quinn is behind the bench for the first time, this team looks like they just don't get the memo. And it's just too easy to say, yes, but it's the player's fault. And there has to be more to it. And that's why I'm saying the Rangers should take a long, hard look at the situation and try to assess what the difference is. And it might not be easy, but I would much rather have a situation where Quinn learns from this and move on than to have a situation where you fire the coach, because I think Quinn is a good coach. I don't think he's the perfect coach for the situation the Rangers were in 2018, but that's a different discussion. But if Quinn can adjust, just like players have to adjust, and we talk about how players have to grow, how players have to evolve, how they have to, work on their game. The same thing goes for coaches. Coaches also have to work on how they approach the team, how they approach certain individuals. I have to do that at work too. I'm not the same person now that I was 4 years ago when I started in my current job. I relocated to Austria for a job, which I loved, but I've learned a lot over the last 4 years, and I do a lot of things differently now today than I did them 4 years ago. And I did that because people gave me feedback. People told me, maybe you can focus on this. maybe you can try a different approach when you're talking about this. I'm pretty sure these conversations happen in every organization, and I'm pretty sure this conversation happens within the Rangers organization. But now it's so obvious that things are different with a different guy behind the bench, even though Quinn is still in control, even though he is still the guy making the lineups. When Knobloch was behind the bench, he didn't mess with the lines. When we were down, when we were trailing, and we were, we lost 2-1 to the Capitals. We lost 2-1 to the Flyers with Knobloch behind the bench. He didn't panic. He didn't all of a sudden start changing lines. No, he stuck with it. And I think that, and this is just my observation, maybe I'm completely wrong here, but the lack of tweaking in the lineup, I feel, gives players more confidence, because
I was just going to say that. Took it out.
They don't have that fear that every little mistake is going to cost them.
Yeah, micromanaging is a huge problem.
Imagine how Julien Gauthier must feel in that 5-4 loss against the overtime loss against the Flyers. You score a beautiful goal, but then you also have a high sticking penalty against, and the next game you're a healthy scratch.
Yeah, it's literally you're toying with life and death. I feel
it kills
a lot of these younger players. That's the approach given to them. So when you have a situation now where it's going to be Knobloch, where he lets them roll, even if they're losing by deficit, whether it's small or big going in the third period, right? Even though it seemed like it was just small during his reign. The players are naturally going to resonate that well and build a confidence, because you're actually showing some confidence in them. In my mind, through a rebuild, that's something that you definitely want to try to instill as much as humanly possible. Again, it is important to have a winning mentality and to try to make playoffs. It will help this player's development. But it is also just as important, if not more, to do all those little things also that help build in. You need to have both of them. It shouldn't be one or the other. And that's what I feel like we're seesawing with. Very similar during our time with Alain Vigneault as a head coach for the Rangers. When the Rangers were in a playoff now mentality, perfect. First year with the Rangers takes them all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. They fall short, but they exceeded expectations and really fell off of emotions a little bit, given St. Louis and his mother, and that's a different story. But my point is, since then, everything kind of started to tread downward with AV, because he was not a coach that was willing to adapt. And as the team was going more so into a rebuild, he was a guy that simply could not handle developing talent, at least not with the Rangers. But now when you have David Quinn, who, yes, does not have that kind of bias that a seasoned vet like Alain Vigneault would, as a longtime NHL head coach with a very strong resume, even though he doesn't have a reign under his belt, Quinn should be as adaptable as any in the NHL when it comes to being a part of a coaching staff. He doesn't have the right to be stubborn. He hasn't deserved the right to be stubborn. He hasn't given a structure that's going to say, wow, okay, like a Mike Babcock. And I know he's a very controversial guy, but Babcock is just an example. Barry Trotz, all these different legend head coaches, right, arguably, that have instilled very similar systems throughout wherever they land, but it has tremendous success. And that's why they kind of stay stubborn, because they know what works and what doesn't. Even in today's NHL, David Quinn does not know nearly to the same level as these other guys. So when you do have Knobloch come in and perform, it is something to reflect on and learn to adapt to. He does not have any right to do something otherwise, because he has not proven himself here as a consistent NHL coach at the level. He's definitely helped at times, but just like the team in a rebuild, he himself is part of that rebuild growing together. And normally a negative and a negative, or positive and positive, they don't go together like that. So it's going to be up to him at the end of the day if he's going to be willing to stop trusting his gut. What worked in college isn't going to work every day here in the NHL level with these constant line changes. We're constantly feeling on edge. I think it reflects on the players. They know that very well. I feel like his kind of personality, his demeanor towards games is really coming off on the players, but in a negative light. That's been more relevant that I've seen this year than definitely in years past. Last season was a very different feeling for me. This season, I'm not loving the vibes I'm seeing more often than not. So that's just my stance in a nutshell on the latest David Quinn, Knobloch debacle, however you want to call it. But I also just want to add one more thing too before we transition into Brendan Lemieux here, and that is the leaders for the past week for the Rangers in point production. So as I said, Adam Fox was the first star of the week for the NHL. Absolutely phenomenal. 8 points in only 3 games for Foxy. He's been a stud.
By the way, he is third among defensemen in points in the league.
Yes. So that Norris caliber type defenseman that needs to put up, on average, say in a normal 82 game season, 40, 50 points. He's right on that pace as it is in a shortened season. So take that as you will, guys, for thinking that he can't be Norris. Maybe it isn't as far-fetched as we initially thought.
He's fourth in the league in points per game, just behind Kel McCarr, who missed a bunch of games, of course.
Yeah. And Zibanejad, 7 points, so he's second with the team. And then Stromer. Ryan Strome continues to produce 6 points in the past 3 games. And then if you look at the Rangers special teams, that was both a positive and a negative for them in these 3 games. They were 5 for 13 on the power play, which was totaling out to right around 38.5%. But then you get onto the penalty kill. That kind of hurt them, especially during the Flyers gave up a couple power play goals in both those games. They were 3 for 9 on the PK, which was 33.3%. So I know small sample size, but definitely one of the not nearly as strong weeks for the Rangers on the penalty kill versus weeks prior here in the season. But I think this is now a perfect time to transition into Brendan Lemieux, something that I don't think anyone expected. I know that you saw the trade late, just I was seeing your activity on Twitter. I don't think you saw it for at least a couple hours, but Brendan Lemieux out of nowhere, I wasn't even in town, so it's not like I can make a video on it or anything, was traded to the LA Kings for a 2021 fourth round pick. Did not expect this. I got to be honest with you. Maybe something towards the deadline, but what's your initial stance on Lemieux going?
Something had to give. Kravtsov being added to the lineup in the next couple of days. Someone had to go. The other option was to put someone on waivers. But with how they have been playing, Rooney and Blackwell would probably have been claimed if they go on waivers now. Howden and Gauthier are still young with cost-controlled years, so they might be claimed as well. So then your only option is, if you don't want to lose them for nothing, that you trade someone. Brendan Lemieux, to me, was an obvious candidate because he didn't really do much for the Rangers this season. The perceived physicality that a lot of fans see in him, I didn't see it. He was the most penalized Ranger this season by a margin.
And he's usually a guy that does draw quite a few penalties, but not something that we've seen as relevant this year.
Yes, and I think overall, if I would have to choose between Howden, Lemieux, Blackwell, Gauthier, and Rooney on who to trade first to make room, then Lemieux is probably the first one to go, because I don't think he brings what a team needs. The Rangers, and this is, we are in a situation where Kevin Rooney and Colin Blackwell and also Phil DiGiuseppe have put management in a position where they can no longer ignore them.
Correct.
It's not that Lemieux played so bad that he was off the team. It's just that he was outplayed by 3 other guys who were behind him in the pecking order when the season started.
Yeah.
On opening night, nobody would have put Blackwell, Rooney, or DiGiuseppe ahead of Lemieux.
No.
Let's be honest. But 3 months, not 2 months later, things have changed. And they trade him to the LA Kings. They get a 4th round pick, which I think is a fair trade. And yeah, I mean, the Rangers aren't a softer team without Lemieux. I think losing Lemieux is not going to hurt this team as much as people think it does. Konechny slew-footed Zibanejad yesterday in the game against, or on Saturday, in the game against the Flyers, and it was Pavel Buchnevich and Ryan Lindgren who stood up for him. It wasn't Brendan Lemieux. So he's not a guy I will miss. I understand that some fans really liked him and they will miss him, but that's what hockey is. I've seen my favorite players be traded throughout the years: Peter Nedved, Derek Brassard. It happens. The Rangers are not a worse team now without him. I think a 4th round pick is a fair return. And a 4th round pick, you can get a decent player in the draft if you do your due diligence, if you do your scouting well, and if you have a little bit of luck, of course, picking the right player. But I looked it up. In the NHL this season, 24 players drafted in the first round alone have outproduced Brendan Lemieux, and an additional 7 are goalies with at least 10 games played.
First round. Did you mean fourth round?
Fourth round, fourth round. Fourth round only in the NHL this season.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're right. I think this was a perfectly fine return when I saw it. I wouldn't have expected anything more. A third round pick, I think, would be stretching it. We can all agree there. Lemieux is a player that I thoroughly enjoyed at times, but not enough. I think that's the best way to kind of put our stance on Lemieux. There were times where I really enjoyed him. I enjoyed his personality, the kind of spark that he tried to bring the Rangers. Seemed like he had the potential to maybe try to become our own Tom Wilson to an extent, but would have to do a lot more working. Lemieux definitely struggles a bit when it comes to his skating. Looks a little choppy out there more often than not. Really just doesn't do enough offensively. And at first, it seemed like, oh, this is a big upgrade. I'll definitely take this over a Cody McLeod, a Tanner Glass. Finally, someone that's younger that seems like it has that kind of competence to grow into a decent, just a solid third liner that could bring you something.
He never took that next step. And
correct.
Now he's 25 years old, and you start to wonder, is he going to take that next step? And if you can get a fourth round pick for Brendan Lemieux, that's great. Brendan Lemieux is not a player that's difficult to replace in free agency.
No, not at all. And another appealing thing about him was, of course, his age when we acquired him. He's a young kid, only his early 20s at the time. So it was kind of like building our own version of however you call it. But
it makes the decision in the expansion draft a little bit easier on who to protect.
Yes. No, of course it does, because now that's one gone. It's one less thing to worry about. So in a nutshell, I thought it was fine. I wish Lemieux nothing but the best in LA. I hope he thrives. Not a guy that I have anything personal against whatsoever. So he
can be on the fourth line with Elias Anderson again.
He very well could. Who knows? Maybe either that or they'll have some time in the Myers. Again, we'll see what happens. But I will say how it's interesting that the besties from last season, and when it came to there were individual friend groups with every team, but it was Lemieux, Tony, and Strome. And going into this season with all these guys being RFAs, right? They all get signed to short-term deals. And you see, in my mind, to an extent, I was always curious, how would one of those guys feel if the other one was gone or dealt? How would that impact them? Because I know that they all were close. Those three were a very close bunch. So between Tony's situation happening and seeing Strome continue to thrive and actually seeing arguably the best game we've seen out of him yet, which is saying a lot. And now with Lemieux, it doesn't look like he's skipping a beat. I think that's telling more than anything that Strome is really becoming such a better pickup by the day than what us Ranger fans initially expected, even after having a career season alongside Brett Mann on the second line with Jesper Fast on his right wing to help out defensively. That's just more of the positive that I see out of Ryan Strome. I think that the maturity level is higher than we thought with handling these situations, because we all know as Ranger fans and following the Rangers, it sucks when you lose a best friend of a teammate. Look at Matt Zuccarello. And Zook, I literally have a life-size poster of him in my room. He's been my favorite Ranger of all time.
I remember the triplet Zuccarello, Brassard, and Hagelin.
Oh, and it was so entertaining. And when they broke up, it was like, wow, this sucked. Like, you could tell it hurt them, right? Yeah. Obviously. When Zook got dealt, Hank was crying in the damn locker room. Who wants to see the king cry of all people? These things naturally happen. It's part of the business, but I don't know. They're just, in my mind, it's funny how a Lemieux trade, and inevitably will be Tony, if either that or he gets cut because he won't be playing for the Rangers, as we know. It's not rubbing Strome the wrong way. It's not impacting his game. And I know that that's not something that should happen for a professional, but like anyone else, we're all human. So honestly, just another hats off to Ryan Strome. I know it's short since he's been dealt, but I literally have no complaints with this man. And that's a tough thing to do, especially for us Ranger fans who normally complain about things more often than not, even in a game where we won 9-0 because we couldn't get double digits, right?
Speaking of Derek Brassard, he scored his first career hat trick last week.
I know. I'm very happy for him. He's thriving in a more increased role with Arizona. They did just a lot of bomb-the-barrel type moves this offseason because they have no money to work with. The whole fiasco with their previous GM in Chayak. And Arizona is quite frankly a shit show. There's no other way to put it. So to see
Phil Kessel had a hat trick. He now has a hat trick for 4 different teams in the NHL.
And that's really cool. I've always loved Brass. Even during his time with the Islanders, I was rooting for him. During his time with the Penguins, it's crazy. Yeah. It feels like yesterday he was still on this club, and he's already been on many clubs, all teams except for the Coyotes that I'm not necessarily a fan of. But now I think is a perfect time to kind of segue as we are getting closer to wrapping things up. Let's talk about Vitaly Kravtsov, shall we? Because this is supposed to be the week for him, right? As I alluded to earlier, Kravtsov is with the club now. Lemieux was out of the way. There's one less barrier, one less thing in the road for him to worry about cracking this lineup. Odds are he will probably start on the third line. I would love to see him in the top six right away. But again, if you're not going to give Alexei Lafreniere consistent time in the top six, what warrants Vitaly Kravtsov being thrown in the top six right away, should he not blow them away in camp? So what's your initial stance on Kravtsov at this point in time, and when do you think we will see his inevitable debut?
Yeah, that right side is pretty crowded with Buchnevich, Kako, and Gauthier already.
Exactly.
Gauthier, who's still a rookie, by the way. I think we sometimes forget how young he still is. He's still eligible for the Calder this season. Gauthier didn't get
time.
Gauthier didn't really get a chance in the top six. I don't see Kravtsov getting that chance either, unless Kako really goes out with injury or really plays a couple of really bad games, which I don't expect will happen. Kravtsov will probably start on the fourth line, I think, and then he and Gauthier will just swap. Unless, of course, there are some issues with the way he plays. Maybe this coaching staff will think he doesn't play the right way. When Howden is back, you're going to have a situation where something's got to give. We traded Brandon Lemieux away. But if you look at our team now, you have the Zibanejad line, Kreider, Zibanejad, Buchnevich. They have the Strome line, Panarin, Strome, Kako. I think we can agree that is our top six. That is our established top six right now. And then on the third line, you have Lafreniere, Hedel, and then either Gauthier or Kravtsov, I guess. And then the fourth line is Blackwell, Rooney, Gauthier or Howden. And then you still have Di Giuseppe. You have 14 forwards, and it's going to be tough for a young player to come into this team and play well enough to keep his spot on the team.
Especially with David Quinn as your head coach. Honestly,
I didn't want to say it, but yeah, David Quinn is the type of coach that it doesn't give players a lot of leeway. He doesn't give players a long leash, with the exception of Brett Howden. He doesn't really give Julien Gauthier.
And happy birthday, Brett Howden, by the way. I believe today's his birthday.
Happy birthday for Brett Howden. He doesn't really give young players the time to make a mistake here or there. He's very strict coach from what I've seen, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just can be frustrating for players. When Gauthier was interviewed after he was a healthy scratch, he's like, "Yeah, I really don't know how to respond to this." When he was being asked questions, and it's tough for a young kid. And Kravtsov will probably have the same challenges that Gauthier is facing. The upside for Kravtsov is that he does have some Russians on the team that he might be able to gel with.
Which could be more incentive to seeing him in the top six at some point. That's my stance on it.
If I'm the coach, and this is not because of Kravtsov or because I like Kravtsov, but if you have a top 10 pick coming in, I would much rather, as a coach, play him in the top six for a couple of games, see what you have, and if it doesn't work, then you can adjust.
Correct. What's the harm in that?
But this season,
tell me.
This season should not be about winning. This season should be about developing your players so you can win the cup in 2-3 years.
And that's something that you and I have both been preaching for a while now. And don't get me wrong, going into the season, I was under the impression that the Rangers, again, would either miss or just make playoffs, right? And I think it would be a huge issue if the Rangers missed playoffs, especially by a significant margin. I know it's a short season, but if my stance was that if the Rangers weren't on the same type of point production level that was either the same, if not better, than last year in a full 82, that there were some issues. This year is up and down because of short. The Rangers are still right out of a playoff spot. They lost twice over the weekend, so that doesn't help their chances. But again, we've said it so many times. Playoff experience is crucial. It's important. It helps the player's development, especially when you're young and are actually able to get the taste at the big stage. You're not going
Yeah.
to have a deep run more than likely.
What also helps a player's development is playing games, being allowed to make mistakes, and learning from those mistakes.
Correct. Yeah, you
And
should not be micromanaged constantly.
You're not going to learn from mistakes by being stapled to the bench for the last 10 minutes of the game because you tried to make a play and it didn't work. The Chicago Blackhawks are in a playoff race. They're in the hunt for the playoffs. They're playing Kirby Dach 20 minutes. I'm not asking for Kravtsov and Lafreniere to play 20 minutes, but
why not?
13, 14 minutes shouldn't be that difficult, should it?
But my point is, why not? Who gives a damn even if they play 20 minutes? Okay, maybe they have a couple really rough games, right? Maybe they look a little out there. Maybe, just maybe, if you throw one of these damn guys on the first power play unit and try to balance things, when the Rangers do have a good shot of getting a couple power plays a game, which goes right in hand with their lack of playing time, whether it's too many power plays or too many penalties that they have to kill. That directly affects the youngsters.
Here's an idea. Do what the Montreal Canadiens have been doing the last couple of weeks and start the second unit when you have a power play.
Why not?
The Montreal Canadiens in the month of March, since Burrows took over their responsibility, their power play is first in the league, 36%. And Burrows was interviewed and said, sometimes I like to play the second unit because it gives you a different opportunity to see what they can do. And I'm just tired of watching the second power play unit getting 15 seconds where they also have to start behind their own net because they only get to be put on the ice when the opponent clears the puck. What's the harm in starting your second unit on the power play? Because the last couple of games, the power play has been clicking and we've scored some nice power play goals. But you and I still remember the 6-7 weeks before that when it was absolutely horrible.
Don't think that this short-term high is going to erase, the majority of the season, that still has that stank on it.
Look,
if you have this for the remainder of the year, then okay, that's a different story. But
if you have two power play units, use both. And I'm not saying it should be 50-50. But if you have guys like Zibanejad and Kreider out there on the ice for a minute already, and there's a penalty being called, what's the harm in putting together a unit that's fresh because they come off the bench?
I think the best way to describe the current coaching staff with David Quinn on his approach this season is the Rangers are trying. The Rangers are pushing. They literally have the mentality of a team that is supposed to be making playoffs, with a heavy lack of regard to the fact that that's the farthest thing from the truth. This is a team in a rebuild. And again, those are things where you like to have qualities of both of those mindsets, but they're not combining. And it's something that needs to combine. Because don't get me wrong, I love 9-0 and 8-3 wins just as much as the next Rangers fan. But when you look at where those goal scoring sprees are coming from, it's fantastic, but it's all your top six. And even in games where you're getting a blowout, you're still not letting, just the youngsters just cook like the entire third period. Why aren't you doing that? Like, what? I just don't. Again, there's certain things I will never understand. And as a Rangers fan, a hockey fan, I will never understand them. I'm not in the coach's perspective. I'm in the fan's perspective. I can try to break down things as much as I want, but it doesn't change the fact that from the eye test, this does not make any rational sense. And especially when you have a coach who tries to break down the reasoning when he fluctuates with his reasoning for the same exact type of play or line change on a rather weekly basis. At least that's been relevant this season. It's hard. It's really hard to try to grasp what is truly going on here. So I think in a nutshell, to wrap things up, and we'll get on to our predictions for the remainder of the week of games for the Rangers, is they have a tall task ahead. They're trying to push for playoffs, but they have a young and exciting Vitaly Kravtsov in the mix. They have Alexis Lafreniere. They have Capo Caco. They have guys that, yes, I don't expect them all to be fantastic out of the jump, but it pisses me off, quite frankly, that if these were players with other organizations, they very well could have been dominant from the jump. And I think Alexis Lafreniere is a guy that, in my mind, would be to an extent, just given how fantastic of an overall talent he is. We've seen the flashes of him, but it looks like that you have like a straitjacket around him. a lot of times. It just feels like he lacks so much creativity and the confidence. He wants to be such a team player when it's beyond what we should be getting from him. We should see more of that personal, that individuality with his performance. That any team in a rebuild would be trying to do their best to get out of their young players. Like that's just my current outlook on things, and it will be until I'm proven otherwise.
Talent-wise, this team reminds me a lot of the Chicago Blackhawks in 2010.
Yeah, right before their run. Yeah.
But the way they're playing, it reminds me of the New York Rangers under Tortorella. And
yeah, that's not a good thing.
that's not a combination that works. And
they're too far away from each other. There isn't that middle. When are we going to get that middle? That's what I want to know.
It's like you're driving a Lamborghini and you're trying to go off road with it.
Yeah. It just like, no, it's not how that works. You need a Jeep Wrangler or something that would make more sense. Not a Lambo. I know it's pretty. I know it looks great on paper. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the style, for what you're trying to do.
And I think that's the biggest issue I have with this team. And when Knoblauch was behind the bench, it just felt like he said to the players, "Go out and play," and that's what they did.
Give them hell. Like, seriously, what's the worst that's going to happen? We lose? Okay. Well, we're going to give our best effort until the end.
Let players do what they do best. And I feel that David Quinn is the type of coach that wants to conform players to a system instead of finding the best system to utilize those players.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. We've seen that week after week. And look, when Kakko really started to turn on this season, when we saw some point production, even though it was short-lived, but seeing, him be more consistent as a player, with just him actually be more relevant each game, that all went in hand when Quinn was quoted saying how, now it's time for us to basically stop focusing on that with Kakko and focus more on just getting like the best out of him as an individual player. Give him a little bit more of a leash. That's basically on the lines of what he originally stated. I want to say maybe a month ago now. It's been a while. That looked great at first. It looks like it's died down since a bit. I feel like it's just been a lot of contradiction going on with, our expectations and what the leader of this team and David Quinn is saying. And that is something that only time will tell if it fixes or not. We obviously hope it does. It sucks being so repetitive on saying that this is a constant Quinn bashing show. We don't want that to be. I can tell that everyone watching this right now, the last thing we ever want is for our head coach or anyone within the organization to not perform well, to cause these criticisms. No one wants this. We just want people to succeed. We want people to do their jobs right. And let's see the youngsters actually try to develop into something. I know you have to put the pressure on them too. Do not get me wrong. There are times where we have not seen nearly enough from Lafreniere, Kakko, whoever, it's even Hedl, plenty of these youngsters. We know this, but there reaches a point in time where you have to try to find that balance of both, and we're still searching for it. So here's fingers crossed to hoping we see it start to kick up this week and that the Rangers don't hold their heads too much over a losing weekend in those back-to-back games. But now I think is a great segue as we head into this upcoming week of schedule. So what do you like to take away with the upcoming week of games and give our predictions?
You're playing home against the Capitals on Tuesday.
Do you think that's going to be Kravtsov's debut?
No.
Okay.
And then we play in Buffalo on Thursday and Saturday.
So you think that Kravtsov's debut won't happen as a home game? You think in my mind, it makes plenty of sense if it's going to be Buffalo.
Look, I would love for Kravtsov to make his debut in Buffalo and score his first career goal in Buffalo like Lafreniere and Miller did, and have 3 rookies score their first NHL goal in Buffalo. That would be amazing.
So I think that could happen. Something was telling me that we might see it on Tuesday, given it might be enough time to get for Quinn's eyes to actually see Kravtsov in person.
Maybe we'll see. But we're playing the Sabres twice. They have to end their losing streak eventually, right?
Yeah. I mean, they might look at this week with us. Who knows?
All right, I'm going to go Quinn's behind the bench, 1-2-0.
1-2-0. Okay. And might add, we were both wrong with our predictions last week. We were feeling a little too confident in this club, a little unrealistic. Yeah, this week I'm going to go 1-1-1. And we'll see. That's all I can really say. Kravtsov, I think we're going to see him within the next 2 games. Again, I think I might just be slightly surprised if we don't see him until Buffalo, because while it's a tall task against the Capitals, don't get me wrong, it almost feels like it would be a little bit more of a comforting thing to have him be his first actual game at home. Kind of let him get adjusted, even if he only plays a handful of minutes. And then when you go to Buffalo, really try to at least give him, like, if we could see 12, 13 minutes out of him, that'd be, I think, more than expected for this coaching staff right now.
Yeah. The other thing to keep an eye on is the Calder eligibility, by the way.
That's true, because he can only play a certain amount of games.
If he wants to be eligible for the Calder next season, he can only play 17 games.
And do you think the Rangers are going to actually prioritize that? Because I doubt it.
No. I mean, teams don't prioritize that over. Like, if Kravtsov is good enough to contribute to this team, they're not going to sit him for 5 games just so he can win an individual trophy next season.
Yeah, but it's not like Chris Kreider still being a Rookie of the Year nominee.
I think Chris Kreider is still eligible, because he was eligible every freaking year of his entry-level contract. It's crazy. No, teams don't care about this, but for fans, it's fun to look at. I'm disappointed that I didn't get to see a Ranger at least be in the conversation for the Calder last season or this season. Where you have a first overall pick and a second overall pick and one of the best young goalies in the world in Shesterkin and one of the best young defensemen in the world in Adam Fox, and you don't even get a top 3 nomination for a Ranger for the Calder. That's frustrating. But I will settle for a Norris Trophy for Adam Fox. Yeah. Although, if I was a reporter, I would vote him in for the Vezina after that performance.
Oh, my. Yeah, look, we're not going to drag this out too long, but yeah, Foxy, oh, my. He makes a beautiful left kick save, and then after that, he stops and goes trying to go around the net again, and he blocks 1 and then 2, and he just stretches out. His body was completely on the right side, stretches out with the stick to the left side. I believe he got that the shot of ricochet on another open net. Yeah. Man, Adam Fox, holy hell.
He had more saves than Carter Hart for last week in Philly.
Seriously, and it's insane what he's doing, because it's like the biggest gripe for a while with Fox was like he has all the tools. He's an absolute dynamo on this blue line. The offense is a little lacking now. I think it will take a little bit. We all felt the offense would come there, but he's now adopted the role that was Tony's and then some. So I'm honestly more curious for the inevitable friendly competition once Niels is with the club next year. Like Trouba, we're not banking on offense for. That's been evident fairly quick after coming off the 50-point year. That's why you shouldn't give an $8 million AAV contract to a guy coming off of a career year, but that's a different story. I will say, though, Niels is going to be interesting to me, because in a lot of ways, it really is like taking that Tony spot again. So how much time is Niels going to have on the power play? Is he going to be paired with Fox here? We're going to see 2 righties there. I'm curious how they're going to structure that next year. That's a discussion for another time, but I'm excited for it.
I'm really excited to see Nils Lundkvist on the power play for 15 seconds at a time.
Best 15 seconds of your life, right? Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's enough laughing for one time. I think we hit everything today. Should be an exciting week of games for the Rangers, hopefully positive one. And I think this is just a big week for Quinn. Once again, I felt like this whole season has been a big week for him, but this one especially. If the Rangers come out positive and we see more structure out of Quinn, that we don't see those desperate moves.
That's the thing. That is the thing. It's not about winning or losing. It's
about how you win or how you lose.
It's not even about ice time. I don't mind if Lafreniere plays 12 minutes or 11 minutes. What I care about is structure. Yeah. I want Lafreniere to play with the same 2 guys every time he steps on the ice.
Let them build that comfortability and that confidence. It's very difficult to get anywhere in this league if you don't have that.
The same way Tim Stützle plays with Drake Batherson and Josh Norris, I think.
Who, if that's the case, they're both great line mates, might I add. 2 very young and upcoming stars as well.
They are great line mates, but they work together because they play together every game.
Correct. And that's something that we should be seeing more and more often. Yeah. We should.
And Hoker is with Horvat and Besser. Put your prospects in a position to succeed, and they will succeed.
100%, Steven. Well, as always, great episode. Thank you all so much, Rangers fans, for chiming in. I hope you guys did enjoy. Please let us know any feedback that you'd like to share with us. It really means a lot, and really looking forward to the next week. Hopefully, next time we talk, we see at least one game of Vitaly Kravtsov in the lineup, and maybe even his first NHL goal. I know I'm probably pushing it there, but hoping for the best, as always. And let's go, Rangers.
Let's go, Rangers.